Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, I'm going to be reacting to last week's Tonight episode on US history. Now, I've looked at stuff regarding history before, reacted to it and all that sort of stuff. So, but mostly it was Irish history and things like that. But now we're going to expand that into the US.
Moving on, our main story tonight concerns history, a subject so fascinating we're sometimes willing to do crazy experiments like this.
Scientists were able to mimic Nessie Amun's voice by recreating his mouth and vocal cords with a 3D printer. It allowed them to produce a single sound.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's this.
Finally, an answer to the question that scholars have asked for ages: what would an ancient Egyptian sound like if he orgasmed while taking antidepressants?
Oh, God.
But look, sadly, history isn't always fun, weird, mummy ventriloquy. It can be painful too, as America has recently been reminded. Because George Floyd's murder has forced a hard national conversation about this country's present, which is impossible to do effectively without re-examining its past. And unfortunately, that's not a conversation that all Americans are well equipped to have. Because there are some embarrassing gaps in many people's knowledge of US history.
And European history as well. There's this interesting thing where there's US students were tested on not like, oh, did they remember, but like literally were they thought stuff at all, like just thought stuff in general. And there were certain areas where European children would have a better education in US history than US children, and that's probably to be expected. It's rather like British children learning about the English Empire. They don't learn about everything, and about every little thing they got involved in. Just a few of the main stuff. It's like, it's there's attitudes there where obviously, a lot of times countries will ignore the little bad things they did, which is obviously a lot harder and will leave a lot more gaps when you're a country that did mostly bad things, invaded a lot of countries. So that it was a lot of its history. My country, we do learn about a couple of bad things people did. Like burning down a barn with a bunch of Protestants in it. Yeah, they had a revolution, and let's just say things were a bit out of hand, and people who were involved in the revolution, turned a bit sectarian and killed a lot of Protestants who were, kind of innocent. So, kind of things there. That's an example. I would know that. Other countries, that happens, not as much. But there's issues.
Just look what happened a few weeks back when the president, in the midst of nationwide Black Lives Matter protests, announced plans to hold a rally in Tulsa on June 19th, a decision astonishingly tone deaf for two key reasons.
Next Friday, June 19th, is Juneteenth, an annual holiday commemorating the end.
Jesus, how do you affect that one up? Like, seriously, like, and it's not like, oh, Donald Trump is an idiot. It's like, but he has advisors, right? Did no one tell him? Probably not a best idea to book that day, because that'll look a bit bad, won't it? Like, the old white rich man who's probably benefited from slavery by just ton, and like it's not gonna look great, is it?
The end of slavery in the U.S. As for Tulsa, 99 years ago this month in 1921, the city witnessed the Tulsa Race Massacre, one of the nation's worst outbreaks of racial violence, recently portrayed in HBO's Watchmen.
Now, the reason they're mentioning Watchmen there is a lot of Americans learned about the Tulsa Race Massacre for the very first time, nearly a century after it happened, from watching that show. Basically, the night that episode airs, many white Americans went, holy shit, I had no idea this happened, while many black Americans went, holy shit, white people are gonna freak the fuck out when they find out this happened. Debbie at work is gonna want to have a conversation.
The thing is, it shouldn't be a surprise. Like, there's certain things where like, oh, I didn't know that happened, but it's like, although it's to be expected. It's like, oh, you find out the Nazis, were in your village and they burnt it to the ground. It's like, yeah, I didn't know that, but like, it's not a surprise. It's kind of be expected. America has a very, very racist history. You should know that they've got a racist history. It should come as a surprise that they, killed a lot of people, and it's just that shouldn't come as a massive surprise to white people. Like that's just what happens when you have racists in power, or even just racists at all.
The coverage of that Trump rally didn't just introduce many Americans to that massacre, but also to the very concept of Juneteenth, the day that commemorates when Union troops informed Texas that enslaved people there must finally be freed, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, by the way. A recent poll showed that a shocking 48% of Americans were either not at all or not very aware of Juneteenth, which is not good.
Yeah, it is. I'm not an American, and I know about Juneteenth. So, it's shocking at times when you see that Americans often would know less than some other people. That's, by the way, not their fault necessarily. Sometimes it is. For example, children wouldn't know if their parents still just don't tell them, or if the curriculum is designed so they don't learn about it, which is a bad sign if you don't learn about these things.
I mean, it'd be fine if nearly half of Americans were unaware of Groundhog Day, the meaningless date when an idiot dressed like Goth Willy Wonka holds up a non-clairvoyant woodchuck whose face somehow screams, "I have better things to do." But Juneteenth actually means something.
Yeah.
And that's just one of many gaps in knowledge that some are now realizing that they have. Just watch Joy Behar try to explain why statues of George Washington should be left alone, and in doing so, actually learning something.
The George Washington, besides being a founding father and a great general and somebody who was so instrumental in this union that we have, in this republic, also freed his slaves.
Freed them. But no, he didn't. That also, I know this might go hard to you, but George Washington was also a very, very sexist man, and also, even if he did free his slaves, he would have still had them to begin with, and it's a bit like torturing someone and then go after you torture them. It's like, well, but you did that first, so
So if you're going to take somebody down, take down Thomas Jefferson, who didn't free his slaves. No?
Yeah.
Sonny disagrees.
He didn't free his slaves. He actually spent the last year of his life relentlessly pursuing slaves that tried to run away. He was a horrible slave owner.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
As usual, Sonny Hostin is very right and Meghan McCain is very there. Because while Washington did promise to free his slaves in his will, it specified they wouldn't gain their freedom until his wife's death. So only one person was freed immediately after Washington died out of over 100. Also, he actually became a slave owner at just 11 years old.
Jesus Christ almighty.
A fact so horrifying, it's kind of hard to know what to do with it. At the very least, the story of him chopping down a cherry tree as a child and admitting it to his father by saying, "I cannot tell a lie," gets way less charming if the next part is his parents saying, "Thank you for being honest, George. As a reward, here are some human beings to own."
Oh, God.
And the thing is, Joy Behar's version of history, while distorted, is definitely more palatable, especially for white people, and seeking out misleadingly comforting versions.
Also, but once again though, it's not even even if he did free slaves, at the point he had them already. You shouldn't have slaves to free. That should be the whole point. It's like when mega billionaires are like, "I donated $20 billion to charity." It's like, how did you get $20 billion though? Because it's pretty much seems like you exploit a lot of labor. So maybe you shouldn't have had that to begin with. How did you get that money? Because you got it from stealing from other people. So ultimately, couldn't we just avoid the philanthropy route by just not letting you have it in the first place? And then the people who you took it from, because you're taking from people. So ultimately, it just seems like you're just, making an argument yeah, I'm such a good person from all the theft I did there, I can now I can give away some of the money I stole from the people. Oh, okay. I don't think that's an argument, really.
Versions of history is a pattern that we've seen again and again this year. From the #1 movie on Netflix during the protest following George Floyd's murder being The Help to...
Oh! Interesting.
Just last week, when Senator Tom Cotton said schools should lose federal funding if they teach a curriculum based on the New York Times' 1619 Project, which brings slavery into the forefront of American history.
But it is at the forefront of American history. Look. How do you think America has become so wealthy? By stealing from others. This has been a mix through underpaying them, forcing them to work or letting them die of starvation, and also enslaving them. So, you know.
And perhaps the most absurd disconnect was in the wake of President Obama's eulogy for John Lewis this week, in which Obama advocated for abolishing the filibuster, if necessary, to expand voting rights. Tucker Carlson had this to say.
Imagine if some greasy politician showed up at your loved one's funeral and started throwing around stupid partisan talking points about Senate procedure.
What?
Can you imagine that? You would be shocked if that...
Well, not really. I mean, if my family were being discriminated against and a politician said, I think we should abolish this thing stopping you from forcing through legislation that would stop you from being discriminated against, we're going, yeah, I guess, yeah, that's a good point, yeah, but we already knew that, but, you know, maybe you should have done that when you were in office, but, you know, just, you know, like, you know, it's kind of, no, it's not, it's my family being discriminated against, yeah, I want this politician to tell me that, yeah, we should remove the discrimination.
If that happened, you'd probably walk out. Desecrating a funeral with campaign slogans? What kind of person would do that?
Wait, what kind of person would honor a friend's legacy by continuing to advocate for voting rights? You know what? I can think of one. John fucking Lewis would do that.
Yeah.
And the truth is, with so many people misunderstanding our history, either by accident or very much on purpose, we thought tonight it might be a good idea to talk about how the history of race in America is currently taught in schools, what some of the gaps are, why they're there, and how we can fill them. And let's start with the fact that there are no national standards for what topics or figures students must learn about at school, and state standards vary widely. When CBS looked into it this year, it found 7 states do not directly mention slavery in their state standards, only 2 mention white supremacy, while 16 list states' rights as a cause of the Civil War. And we actually did a whole 21-minute piece about what is wrong with that.
Which, you know, alright too. And yeah, it's not a good sign.
Argument, but this clip explains it significantly quicker.
The root cause of the Civil War is clear.
What caused the Civil War was
slavery.
The main cause and why the South decided to secede was for slavery.
So why do our history textbooks get it so wrong?
Y'all don't want to deal with the fucked up shit that y'all ancestors did.
But like that's not where it ends though. It is the thing. It seems like it is expanded into actively, well, a problematic situation where it's like, oh, why do we have a civil war? Because one side didn't want to pay people for their labor. And wanted to not really treat them as human beings. Yeah, they wanted to basically let them die if necessary. Yeah, I think that might, you know, people might look at that and go, yeah, interesting. It seems very much like another thing that's going on, doesn't it? You know, the way in America, there seems to be almost a new sort of line of slavery. Maybe they just don't want you to think about it like that. So, you know, it's like, I think it's even further than just not wanting to look at things ancestors did, but like, also, you know, it's kind of similar to what's going on now, so.
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much sums it up. And it can be hard to deal with what your ancestors did. Trust me, I'm British.
Yeah. If you're British, God almighty, pretty much have a worse history than white Americans anyway.
One of our most famous tourist attractions is a castle where we executed people for centuries and are now filled with stolen jewels, like the Koh-i-Noor diamond, which, according to the Tower's website, was presented to Queen Victoria. And that verb is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, like presented, like, you know what happens when someone stabs you in the chest, and the thing you've been working on all your life, and you fall, try to protect it, and then they're like, oh, thank you for presenting it to me.
It was presented in pretty much the same way that India was, in so much as it was present and Britain fucking took it.
Yeah.
And for all the current hand-wringing about how any changes would politicise US history, it's worth remembering that the teaching of it has always been political. After the Civil War, the battle over how history would be told in textbooks was intense because, you know the saying, history is written by the winners? The South set out to prove that wrong. One organisation called the United Daughters of the Confederacy campaigned for schools to adopt...
Well, there's no real winners in the Civil War.
...textbooks that would accord full justice to the South.
You know, because, like, unless you're using mercenaries, how can you fight a war if you don't have support from the people? And if you have support from the people, then all winning a war will do is just force a group of people to just be more silent about it. But still internally, you know, which is why you get really deep-rooted racism in people, I think, because, you know, they dates back to, you know.
Librarians to write unjust to the South on the ones that didn't, which is clearly absurd. It'd be like a librarian writing unjust to Voldemort on Harry Potter's 1 through 7, or unjust to Whale on Moby Dick, or unjust to L. Ron Hubbard on Leah Remini's Troublemaker, surviving Hollywood and Scientology. But that impulse to downplay the horrors of slavery has marked how school children have learned about it ever since. A Georgia textbook from the 50s claimed the master often had a barbecue or a picnic for his slaves. Then they had a great frolic.
Oh yeah, just the Jesus Christ, that's oh God Almighty, that's bad. That's bad.
Look, every excuse for slavery is shitty, but we gave them sandwiches sometimes has to be one of the shittiest.
Yeah.
And some who learned history from books like those couldn't believe what they were being told at the time. Just watch this Alabama schoolteacher revisit her 4th grade textbook, No Alabama.
Some slaves were good workers and very obedient. Many took...
I wonder why that would be. Maybe the violence that you would get if you weren't obedient. You know, that kind of thing. Maybe that was the main driver for the whole obedience thing, you know.
Pride in what they did and loved their cabins and the plantation.
Oh, they loved it. Oh, God. And I wonder how you know that. Like, how exactly does someone enslaving someone come around and say, how do you feel about the old cabin, do you? The cabin I forced you to live in and I don't pay you. And the only reason why you don't die is because I give you a little bit of food. You know, that's the only reason, because I stop you from getting any more food. You know, so like you can't really eat well at all. How do you like the cabin? How'd you like it? Answer well. You know, it's...
as if they actually owned them. Others were lazy, disobedient, and sometimes vicious.
I mean, yeah, you know what you say. It's just that's what you call someone. You know when you're beating someone up and they just won't accept it, you know? You keep assaulting them, but they won't let you. And they're just so disobedient, aren't they? When they won't let you beat them up, you know, they won't let you kill them. That's the kind of thing. It's just real, you know. I don't know why someone wouldn't work for someone who's forcing them to work for no pay and abuses them on a regular basis. I wonder why that would be.
I wonder what kind of slave I would have been. I wonder if I would have been one of those lazy slaves who just were not willing to work for nothing.
Yeah.
Or disobedient because I just didn't want to be a slave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That contempt is fully merited there. Because, among other things, the idea that being a lazy slave was a character flaw as opposed to a frequent act of protest against a brutally unjust system is infuriating.
Who the calls someone lazy when it's like, yeah, you don't want to work for nothing? I mean, why would you work for nothing? You get nothing out of it. Like, you literally get nothing. That's the whole point of working, to get something out of it, whether that be joy or actually something physical. Like, you know, if I build a bed, for example, if I actually, you know, I would think surely I would get the bed, or if I sold it, I'd get the money for the bed. But no, in this scenario, no, you build the bed and then you just, you don't get anything. Why exactly would I do that willingly? Is that laziness, or is that just me being like, well, I'm not going to get anything out of it? So
infuriating. And it makes No Alabama sound less like the title of that textbook and more like something you'd yell at it. No Alabama, stop that.
Yeah.
Bad textbook, no. And those passages were in the standard Alabama history textbook into the 70s. So people who read them and may have been shaped by their content are now in their 50s doing things like running businesses or, I don't know, holding elected office. And while newer textbooks may not be quite that egregious, there are still problems. Earlier this year, one historian flagged a pretty remarkable euphemism in a current Texas schoolbook.
This is a picture, and the caption says, some U.S. settlers brought slaves to Texas to help work the fields and do chores.
Oh, the chores, the labor, like the actual, the work needed to eat. Yeah, that work. That's the work. Yeah, just, your general chores, cleaning your room, making all the food, growing all the food, working all the hours, doing all the work. Yeah, that's those chores.
And, I don't think we should describe slave labor as chores.
Yeah, you're right. We probably shouldn't.
Yeah, you don't.
Calling slave labor chores is a euphemism on par with calling Hitler a best-selling author with a side hustle, or JFK.
I mean, selling is a bit of a, it's like, best-selling. Also, best-selling is a very vague title. Like, what do you mean by that? Anyway, like, selling is a bit dodgy. Like, I don't think he made much money out of it, Mostly, handouts. Although probably a bunch of people, bought, multiple copies because they were obsessed with him.
JFK's assassination, a bad hair day, or this, a comedy show. And look, state standards and textbooks are just a baseline here. What happens in a classroom largely depends on teachers, who have a very difficult job, often working with scant resources, meaning that, among other things, they may not be able to get updated versions of textbooks. And some work really hard to correct poor materials, but others can actually make things even worse with tone-deaf assignments and classroom exercises that you may be familiar with from seeing local news stories like these.
This is the activity in question. It asks students to choose to be a slave or a slave owner, and then to write a journal entry that describes daily activities before the Civil War.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, that should be interesting. I was tasked with that when I was younger. It was like, do you want to choose to be a Norman invading Ireland, or be an Irishman defending their land? Yeah, I think that was slightly tamer than this. Do you want to be the absolute moron who, likes to keep people? Or do you want to be the enslaved person? It's a Hobson's choice as far as I can tell. Either you want to kill yourself, or, you want to kill the person who's enslaving you. Although I'm pretty sure most, slave owners would have been perfectly fine with their own conscience. Don't know how, but...
The question about slavery read, you own a plantation or farm and therefore need more workers. Set your price for a slave. These could be worth a lot.
This North Carolina...
Okay. Wow.
Carolina grandmother couldn't believe the assignment given to her fourth grader. And in this game, it's called Escaping Slavery. A slavery-themed Monopoly-like game students played in elementary school.
Wow, this is...
Children worked in small groups, got this freedom punch card. If the group ran into trouble, the card said they'd be severely punished and sent back to the plantation to work as a slave. Were they gonna hang them? They gonna kill them?
What the fuck are you doing?
Jesus Christ! This is like some dystopian stuff. Jesus Christ almighty, like, this was published in 2020. This feels like what we'll have in, like, I don't know, 2-3 years in every school, like, just dystopian, full-on, psychotic sort of SHIT.
Doing there? You can't reduce a person's freedom from slavery down to what is basically a Jimmy John's punch card. And just imagine what it would feel like to be a black kid in that classroom. Or, if you don't have to imagine, remember. Because it's not just the history that hurts here, it's how you're being made to feel while you learn it. And the frequency with which stories like those tend to crop up may have something to do with the fact that the overwhelming majority of school teachers are white, and many may have grown up learning the same skewed version of history that they are now passing on. And when you take all of this together...
I mean, no offense, but if you're a history teacher, how thick are you? Like, what, you're just gonna read the textbook you give to children? You living at that? Like, don't, like, in my country, to become a history, you have to, like, do a university degree. So you have to do a little bit more than just, you know...
We're giving kids incomplete educations in history while also doing real harm. Because those kids grow up. Just listen to this guy from Tulsa explaining how he felt when he finally found out about that 1921 massacre that happened where he lived.
When I went to OU in 1998, I was sitting in a class of African-American history, and the professor was talking about this place where black people had businesses and had money and had doctors and lawyers, and he said it was in Tulsa. And I raised my hand and said, no, I'm from Tulsa. That's not accurate. And he was talking about this massacre, riot. I said, man, what are you talking about? I said, I went to school on Greenwood. I've never heard of this ever.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
And his school really let him down there.
Like, who just ignores their local history?
Think of the emotional whiplash.
Like, local history. Like, I had to do loads of projects in local history, and I was just loads of projects. Constantly doing
that man must have gone through. He found out something amazing had once existed, right where he lived, something horrible had taken it away, and that the history had been kept from him. And all of this had happened less than 100 years ago. The dinosaurs died 65 million years ago, and you would still be absolutely floored if someone only just told you about them. I'm sorry, there were what? Where? What do you mean everywhere? And they were how big? Some of them could fly? What happened to them? Oh no! How the fuck is this the first time someone's mentioning this to me?
Yeah.
Look, it is pretty clear that we need to upgrade the way that we teach our history. And while I obviously don't have time to go through all of that history right now, it might be worth going slowly through 3 big mistakes that many historians believe that we make and should correct in schools and beyond. The first is that we don't fully acknowledge the history of white supremacy in America, from its founding to the present day. And I know that any time someone suggests telling children anything less than Jesus would have been best friends with Abraham Lincoln.
Jesus wasn't white.
The pushback is fierce. Watch Laura Ingraham take one school board's discussion of an anti-racist curriculum and spin it out into a dystopian vision designed to terrify her viewers.
Now, every subject, every extracurricular activity will be perverted to turn your kids into mini Ilhan Omars.
How?
They're going to learn that capitalism is racist.
It is. I mean, it just is, like... It doesn't have to be, obviously. You don't necessarily need capitalism to be racist. You know, for example, the US could just completely wipe the minimum wage away, and then it could move all those factories it has in countries like China and move them to America and pay the workers in their country, you know, like £1 a week. Obviously, they die, so... You know, you'd soon lose workers. But, you know, the point being, you know, ultimately... It doesn't have to be racist, but it is, so.
History, as conventionally taught, is racist.
Of course. Like, the Nazis, the Americans, the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French. These are just a few examples. The Romans, the Greeks, these are all racist people in history, and they have a very, very big part of history. So, if you're in any of those countries, that is your history. And if you're outside of those countries, then that's the history that surrounds you. So yeah, history's racist, obviously.
Literature, most of that's racist.
Well, no. You just need to stop, platforming the racist stuff. Just saying. If you think most of literature is racist, then you might want to consider what you look at, because kind of implies you like a lot of racist stuff,
Patriotic songs, racist. And
not patriotic. They're white supremacy songs. But anyway, I'm just making the point. For example, a lot of songs Catholics in Northern Ireland find very, very problematic is the issue of Protestants singing songs that are, Protestant supremacy. So they're technically patriotic for Protestants, but they're, kind of something else for non-Protestants. Anyway.
And the Declaration and the Constitution, of course, they're racist.
Well, I mean, they're also sexist. I mean, my country has an incredibly sexist constitution. Just so sick. It literally says the woman's place is in the home. Like, who says that? Who says that? And who puts it in the constitution? I'll tell you who. The Catholic Church and Eamon De Valera, the most sexist man in Ireland. Just saying, he literally was offered support in fighting the British, and because that support weren't men, he refused. Like a moron. People died because of his sexism. Directly.
Are you sensing a theme here?
Now, Laura Ingraham might not seem like someone capable of following anything apart from black teenagers simply trying to shop at CVS, but I think she actually has picked up on a theme there, because seeing as she brought up the Constitution, let's talk about it. Because that document is a lot of things. Genuinely revolutionary and the foundation of an improbably long-lived democracy, but it's also infused with and inextricably linked to slavery and a legacy of racial inequality. From the 3/5 clause through the fugitive slave clause, the Constitution...
It's like how when England banned slavery in their empire, they didn't ban it in their own country. They banned it outside them. So it would look like it's not okay for you to do it, but it's okay for me. That kind of attitude. So while they didn't ban it for, I believe hundreds of years later, I forget exactly when it was, but the point is, it took them quite a lot longer to ban it in their own country than it did to ban it in general. So, also, when they did ban slavery, they compensated people for the lost, money. Did they pay the slaves that money? No, unfortunately, they didn't do that. Now, of course not. No, you couldn't, pay the people who were doing all the labor. So, people got a ton of money for having slavery, and then the people who actually were enslaved got nothing.
Both codified slavery and made it harder for individuals to escape it. And the fact the Constitution is infused with racism does not mean it's cancelled. It's not a YouTuber who's just now realising it was wrong to do blackface for 14 years, and it definitely doesn't mean that kids shouldn't learn about it.
Also, once again, can people stop using the word cancelled? In like, famous people don't get cancelled. Like, let's say a person with 60 million followers comes down to my level of subscribers. That would be being cancelled. Someone with 60 million followers falling down dramatically to, let's say, 100,000. That's not being cancelled. They still have a following, and a big one at that. So ultimately, I really, really get annoyed when people talk about, cancel culture, when they're talking about a famous person losing maybe a lot of following, maybe a lot of money, but practically speaking, if you earn a ton of money, if you earn over 50,000 you can't have this excuse of, well, I was cancelled. I mean, before I was earning tens of millions. It doesn't matter. You're earning more than the majority of people. So until you reach the point where this has actually made you in a worse position than the majority of people, only then can you say you're being cancelled. And that's where ultimately private people tend to be the only ones who can be cancelled, because they don't have fans. They rely on powerful people to say good things about them. If you're employed by someone and then they get annoyed at you, so they say, I'm going to cancel you, and then instead every single time you look for a job, they say, no, don't employ them. So you'd never get employment. You become unemployed, you can't get a job, because every single time you're going to get a job, they reject it.
But they should be taught to see it as an imperfect document with imperfect authors who both extolled the ideals of freedom for all while at the same time codifying slavery. And that is possible to do. Kids can understand that things can be racist and also other.
Yeah, like my constitution, just terrible. It's full of sexism. It's terrible. It needs to be redrafted, definitely. Ban all sorts of things. All sorts of things. Horrible thing. Horrible thing. Just disgusting. Eamon de Valera, dictator, and a horrible man. Horrible. Just disgusting. And the point I'm making is that I can accept that. And what I do is I say we should change the Constitution so that it reflects our ideals. Not the ideals of a sexist.
Other things, the Constitution can be revolutionary and also racist. Movies can be romantic and also racist. Children's books can be charming and also racist. Broadcasters can be incredibly successful and also racist.
Well,
and if kids are taught...
That's probably why they're incredibly successful, I have to admit it.
It's an incomplete history. They'll either never get the full story, or when they do, they don't have the framework to understand how the pieces fit together. Here is one professor explaining how hard it can be for his students learning the whole truth about Thomas Jefferson.
What that child is then going to do is say, wait a minute, why didn't I know this before? I've been running around here singing Thomas Jefferson's praises, and I didn't realize that he's the R. Kelly of his time.
So while it may be uncomfortable, he says you have to be honest.
I swear Ohioans suffer from Underground Railroad-itis, right? You ask him, who would have been for the Underground Railroad, right, in class? Every white hand goes, I'm like, look, if all of y'all would have been down for the Underground Railroad, the wouldn't have been underground, right? There would have been no need for it.
Okay. First of all, it says a lot about Jefferson that if you went back in time, explained to him who R. Kelly was, and told him he was being compared to him, the child pornography charges would not be the #1 reason that he'd be insulted by the comparison. But that professor makes a really good point there. The less you know about history, the easier that it is to imagine you'd always be on the right side of it. Because the truth is, the history of America is a history of changing an America that badly does not want to be changed. And that actually brings us to the second common mistake that we make, viewing American history's progress as if it was constantly and inevitably upward. Too often,
Jim Crow.
US history is reduced down to there was slavery, then there was a civil war, then there wasn't slavery anymore, then there was a civil rights movement, then there wasn't racism anymore. Just a smooth, steady, upward arc. But the moment on either side of those landmarks...
Jim Crow, KKK, all these things happened... after, the kind of things like they had an obsession after that fact. So, it's
eras complicate the hell out of that.
Also, saying, civil rights movement and stuff, it did not. It's really weird. Like there was an interview with this fella, he's an American. He said, I don't think there's racism in England. Why would you think that? England is probably even more racist than America in some ways. Not as there are, obviously probably less out-and-out, full-on racists who'll just admit it. But there is definitely as much under the seams.
Those people. No, I don't trust them. Look at them. They bring in...
it's this kind of BS. It's like, yeah, that is definitely there. It's definitely there in America as well.
Because they were filled with white hostility and ugly backsliding. Take the century between the end of the Civil War and the Civil Rights Act, which is often glossed over, but should probably be taught a lot more thoroughly. It begins with Reconstruction, a dozen or so years of real promise when, very basically, the South was forced to redraw their constitutions and permit the registration of black voters. That's right, black men in the South were voting in the 1860s and 70s. When they fought for the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s, they were fighting to get back something that they'd already had.
Yeah.
The effects of Reconstruction were almost immediate.
Yeah, it's like in my country, you know, they before Amy Delaroy got his hands on the Constitution, well, women had the right to vote. We almost instantaneously get the women the right to vote. But you know what happened when he got to power? Let's just say he drew back a lot of equality. So, you know, moving backwards all the time.
Immediate, with an estimated 2,000 black men serving in elected office during that era, including a number in Congress. And just look at these guys. A+ achievement, A++ facial hair there. And sure, you might think that you can grow your mustache into your beard. Try it. You fucking can't.
True. A lot of people just really, they just can't. It's like, and it just looks bad. It just looks bad. It's like embarrassing. It's like, no, that, and I feel sorry for some of them. Others, no, I don't. But you know, some of them.
But in response to that progress, white people pushed back and pushed back hard. The KKK was founded, 2,000 black people were lynched, and by 1877, the South had regained local control. Here is a crazy story that you might not know. In 1898, the multiracial city government in Wilmington, North Carolina, became the target of the only coup d'etat ever to take place on American soil, in which a mob...
Well, I mean, not anymore.
Of up to 2,000 armed white men killed at least 60 black residents and...
Yeah, it's like I was looking at a video last day and yeah, they were talking about January 6th in 2020. And you know, let's just say they didn't necessarily know what was going to come in 2021.
And replace the city's aldermen with white supremacists.
Yeah.
And if this is the first time that you are learning about the only coup on American soil,
once again,
you're not alone. Because what happened there is usually either not taught at all.
But like, as I say though, both coups are for white supremacy. So.
Or, as the author of a book on that massacre points out, taught very, very misleadingly.
Like, that's the thing. That's what's concerning about American history. When you look at it, it's like, so that's 2 coups d'etats, and both of them were for white supremacy. Amongst other things. But the point is, like, that's dodgy.
Here's from a 1949 textbook, quote, "A number of blacks were jailed for starting a riot, and a new white administration took over Wilmington's government."
Wow, that's, you know, riots are bad at sometimes, but a lot of the time, if someone has a riot, yeah.
End quote.
Yeah, that's it. And that is not just denying what happened, it's even worse. It's placing the blame for it on the victims. Technically, you shouldn't even call it a history book so much as a book of lies, because we kind of felt a bit weird about that whole violent racist coup thing. And Wilmington wasn't even the midpoint of that century of backsliding. And the Laura Ingrams of the world will probably say, yeah, that's all ugly, but in a sign of American exceptionalism, the civil rights movement ended all of that when Martin Luther King's dream came true. Did it now? Did it? And that is the version that most Americans are taught in school, but it leaves a lot out. In fact, take the March on Washington. That wasn't actually its full name. It was called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.
Yeah.
And the economic justice part of it was front and center. King actually grew more outspoken about that issue in the years that followed. And King himself understood why it was harder to make progress on that front.
It didn't cost the nation 1 penny to integrate lunch counters. Well, it didn't cost the nation 1 penny to guarantee the right to vote. But now we are dealing with issues that cannot be solved without the nation spending billions of dollars and undergoing a radical redistribution of economic power.
Yeah,
yeah, that's the thing. It's also why you see things like, you know, Jesus also was apparently not too adverse to certain wealth transfers, although, to be honest, in fairness, like, it's the Roman Empire. You know, you really need to allow wealth transfer to take money from the Roman Empire.
turns out that Martin Luther King had more than one dream, and one of them was about wealth redistribution.
Yeah.
So while I know it's easy to distort King's full legacy down to that one soaring speech, point to the cast of This Is Us and say, "See, we did it, everyone. Everything is fixed now." The truth is, the civil rights movement was longer, messier, more radical, and crucially, was thwarted in more of its aims than many of us were taught in school. And that actually brings us to the final point here, which is that we don't connect the dots to the present. And those dots are very much there. Look at the black-white wage and wealth gaps. They are both larger now than they were when King gave that speech. And our housing and education systems, even in liberal cities like New York and LA, are still shamefully segregated. And if you don't teach history properly, all you see is those effects and not the causes. When the truth is, you can draw a straight line from the post-Civil War return of plantation land to former Confederates, through the massive transfers of land via the Homestead Act, mostly to white individuals, through the growth of the suburbs in the 20th century, where redlining kept black people from moving into white neighborhoods throughout the country. In fact, just listen to this woman in Levittown, Pennsylvania, explain her objections to a black family moving to town in 1957 with some real honesty.
We like the advantages that Levittown seemed to offer in comparison to other cities. And we understood that it was going to be all white, and we were very happy to buy a home.
Oh my.
Home here.
Do you think a Negro family moving
Jesus Christ Almighty
here will affect the community as a whole?
Definitely. The whole trouble with this integration business is that in the end, it probably will end up with mixing socially.
I mean, that would be awful. Imagine if we
met up with each other? What? What the is this kind of argument?
And you will have, well, I think their aim is mixed marriages and becoming equal with the whites.
Oh, imagine that. Imagine treating people equally.
This is this is something that really annoys me. Is when people who are oppressed talk about not allowing other people to rise up against oppression. Why? Okay? If you are not a white, straight, cis man with a lot of wealth and has a lot of family connections, why would you ever think that this would be a sensible thing to do? Because you are next. You are going to be discriminated against as well, okay? Because all the time, this is what happens. This one, it's like, just God Almighty. You're not equal with everyone. And neither are they, so maybe we should all be equal, for God's sake.
Wow. It is always weird to hear someone, whether or not they look like summer casual Betty Crocker, frame human beings being treated equally as a negative.
Yeah.
It's like hearing someone say, the whole trouble with putting graham crackers, chocolate bars and marshmallows together is that we might end up with s'mores. Yeah, exactly. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Only a fucking monster wouldn't want that. And it might not surprise you to see that someone was incredibly racist in the 1950s, but one of the problems with the way that we teach history is that too often it sort of trails off after the civil rights movement, and when you skip over the past half century, you don't get to see the process by which white supremacy, instead of disappearing, merely adapted. And perhaps nobody made that process clearer than Lee Atwater, a top Republican campaign strategist who worked for, among others, Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Here he is, spelling out the whole game in 1981. And I'm going to warn you, you're about to hear the N-word a lot.
Okay.
You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger.
Oh, God.
By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your back guard. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. We want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger nigger.
Jesus.
Holy shit.
Well, I mean, at least, you can admit it. Some people are just openly racist for apparently no reason other than they are. It's,
Now, Now, obviously, he's a little too comfortable with that word. You tend to only hear it come out that smoothly in either Tarantino movies or online forums in which white children play video games together. But that is actually a pretty concise history of a certain thread in politics for the past half-century, which brings us all the way up to the present day, literally the present Wednesday, which is when the President of the United States, in announcing a rollback of an Obama-era rule under the Fair Housing Act, sent a tweet in which he informed all of the people living their suburban lifestyle dream that they will no longer be bothered or financially hurt by having low-income housing built in their neighborhoods.
Wow. To be honest now, this is a little story from me. I was, away on a little trip a while back, and basically I had to go on a little trip. Anyway, so the area I was in was an area that had bordered on a very rich area. The area was very, very nice. It had all these mansions. But the thing was, the mansions were built right next to an area which typically would be considered low-income housing. So basically, the attitude I got from that was, to be honest, what's the problem? What's the problem? What's going on there? Why would you be annoyed at that? Oh, I guess if you're the rich person, you might be annoyed because you don't get to live your life as a little thing. Yeah. Let's just say, you don't really like the fact that they're there. Anyway, just not very nice place, to see. People being bigoted.
And that is basically a campaign promise crafted by Lee Atwater and designed to win over this woman who's probably dead by now.
You never know, but that kind of thing. It's like, that's the sort of thing you have there, where it's like you just think, why not have that?
And what's notable there is not that Trump's being racist, which is not remotely surprising. It's how neatly he fits in to a systemic racism that's been baked into this country from the beginning and which will still be here when he is gone. And if kids aren't taught this, what chance do they have to understand what's happening right now? And obviously, you'd need to calibrate this to each age group. No one is suggesting playing that Lee Atwater tape to third graders, but it's a bit like sex ed. You don't skip straight ahead to ejaculation, which, by the way, is a pretty good sex tip for anyone with a penis, but we also don't spend the first semester of sex ed teaching kids that we were all dropped out of the sky by fucking storks.
Yeah,
because they'll later have to unlearn that.
True.
And I know that addressing mistakes like these will not be easy. There'll be bad faith charges that doing so is political, although I would argue no more political than the choices we've made to teach history the way that we do now. And no doubt some parents will instinctively resist this. Back in 2010, when Texas was reviewing its state standards, one parent made it very clear that the main history he wanted his kids taught was that of American exceptionalism.
The one thing I want my kids to know when they get out of school about America is that the worst day in America beats the best day in any other country.
What? Well, that would be lying. That would be lying. You'd be lying to your children.
That seems pretty easy. It seems like there becomes this great focus on the negative history of America instead of saying, take for instance slavery. Instead of looking at it in a positive light that Americans overcame something as evil as slavery.
No, you had slavery, and then you sorta, kinda banned it, but also not really. Like, you made people pay people for their labor, but also not that much, so effectively you still have slavery. And also, if someone is a prisoner, they can also be treated as a slave, and because you have private prisons, you now have private companies having slaves. So, no, you haven't got over slavery. You haven't even removed slavery.
And that we're still a great nation today should be a testament to the kind of American spirit that exists in this country.
Okay, So there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
First, your worst day in America really depends on who you are and, importantly, when you are. There is a reason, for instance, Marty McFly was white, because black people generally don't hang around with John C. Calhoun lookalikes who are obsessed with going back to the 1950s. And second, Americans did not overcome slavery. Certain Americans overcame certain other Americans, and slavery was ended. But whether it was overcome is very much
That's how it ended. It's not really true either.
Another matter. And look, while I understand any parent wanting their kids to be taught something inspiring, what he's essentially asking for there is for his kids to be misinformed.
Yeah.
And that's not going to serve them well when they grow up. It's not going to serve any of us well. Because ignoring the history that you don't like is not a victimless act. And a history of America that ignores white supremacy is a white supremacist history of America, which matters. Because while it might seem obvious, history isn't over yet. It's still being written. And you know who understood that? John Lewis. He's someone who's very much part of American history, and he knew the importance of drawing a line from the past through the present. That might be why one of the last things that he did before he died was visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington. He even wrote an op-ed to be published posthumously, which speaks directly to what we've been talking about tonight. Just listen to this extract read by Morgan Freeman.
You must also study and learn the lessons of history, because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change. And that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time.
Exactly. History, when taught well, shows us how to improve the world. But history, when taught poorly, falsely claims that there is nothing to improve. So we have to teach it better and continue to learn it, because it's important for all of us to listen to the voices of history, whether they are a call to action, truly horrific, or a sad mummy orgasm. Still excellent. That's our show. Thank you so much for watching. We're off next week, back August 16th. Good night.
Well, that was Last Week Tonight. Thank you for watching this video on the US history. Do go ahead, subscribe to Last Week Tonight. See, I'm subscribed there. You know, give it a like, and yeah, thank you for watching. Hopefully you'll come back.